Sometimes a good game still seems like a ripoff. It may not play badly, it may not have bad graphics, and overall the experience might even be pleasant, but you get to the end and it just feels like it wasn't long enough. There should be more, you say, either to a friend or on a message board. And again, the experience wasn't bad, it just feels like you've been shortchanged. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today gameranx asked the question, how important is the length of a single-player game? So way back in the days of the Nintendo Entertainment System, the first game I got was Super Mario Bros. It took around 2 hours to beat. As that series progressed, Mario 3 took about 5 hours, and then Super Mario World took about 6, and that was basically, for me, the benchmark. That's what to expect from a game. You bought a game and you were like, okay, how long is this relative to Super Mario World? For a lot of people, it's still a lot like that. They don't use necessarily Super Mario World as a benchmark, but gaming is a casual thing. And certainly with a lot of low-cost titles, such as what you get on a mobile gaming platform, expecting maybe tens of hours of experience is a little overboard, perhaps? But if Square makes you pay $15 on mobile for one of their games, well, it better be Square length. That's getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about Square length. Now, there are certainly games prior to Squaresoft's RPG classics that were longer than 6 hours, but Square essentially popularized the quote-unquote long game. I'm sure somebody will argue with that, but hear me out. On the NES, it was Final Fantasy. On the Super Nintendo, it was Chrono Trigger. And on the PlayStation, oh, you better believe it's Final Fantasy VII. Square said, you know what, this is a platform that we can tell a story on. And that's pretty much what their objective was, to create a narrative experience that everyone sort of had to navigate through from both an emotional and a gameplay perspective. And they gradually got better and better at it. Certainly their first few attempts were not exactly the best thing you've ever experienced, but by the time they got around Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger, there was really some deep characterization happening through the course of an interesting story. Sure, the scenarios could often be weird, but that's part of why we like the Japanese games, is it not? But with Chrono Trigger taking 40 hours, and then the big game, whether you love it or hate it, Final Fantasy VII, was 60 hours, we got games that were generally not really considering themselves to be just a compact experience that you might have when you have a little bit of extra time. It was something you either had to absorb over a very long binge, like Netflix but with games and before Netflix existed, or like you might read a book in your off time. And again, these aren't the first games like that, but they certainly popularized this concept. Squaresoft really did a lot in terms of making it acceptable to make a game that is extremely long, requires an extreme amount of concentration, and a good memory to even remember what's going on. And say what you will, this was generally considered pretty nerdy stuff ahead of those games, and even was for a while after, but the adoption by mainstream gaming had certainly happened. Now, with a 15-hour game like the original Tomb Raider from 1996 costing the same amount as a 60-hour game with a comparatively near-endless story, starts to create the conundrum we want to address with this video. Tomb Raider's more than twice the length of Super Mario World. So if we're speaking in relative terms with those two games, damn, Tomb Raider's a long game. And in the respective years that those games came out, they were both certainly full-priced games. They didn't really have half-priced games, quote-unquote. Everything that was licensed had a certain price, especially when it was new. So assuming graphics in no way figured into your equation, which game do you think, at least from a time perspective, you would feel less ripped off by? $60 Super Mario World, $60 1996 Tomb Raider, or $60 Final Fantasy VII. For Mario, it's roughly $10 per hour of game. For Tomb Raider, it's about $2.50. And for Final Fantasy VII, that's $1 per hour of game. Now, obviously quality is not a factor here, and taste can't even kind of be figured in. Certainly, we're all going to have our own various favorites within even that small selection of video games, but in terms of length, the obvious value is Final Fantasy VII. And being Final Fantasy VII was such a large hit that essentially brought JRPGs, RPGs, and a whole lot of various different gameplay elements into the mainstream, it certainly brought the long game into the public consciousness in a way it had never been before. The problem that presents itself here is that if everybody actually legitimately expects 60-hour games, then a lot of games aren't going to get made because, frankly, a lot of ideas are not 60-hour ideas. A lot of ideas are 12-hour ideas. And then there's the fact that video games are now just a little bit more mainstream to the point where an adult can play them, and an adult does not have the same kind of time a child does. When I was younger, I had so much time I could play any game of any length and not worry about whether or not I will finish it. And although the job that I have certainly affords me more time to play games than I would have had if I worked some other job, thank you gameranx, I still certainly don't have the same kind of time that I had as a kid. When I was younger, if you had told me that episodic games were going to happen, I probably would have said to you, that sounds dumb. But as an adult, I feel like that sort of gives me a little bit better of a chance to experience a longer story, because I'm experiencing it one chapter at a time after waiting for it and getting excited for it and having theories about what's going to happen next. Say what you will, I love the Hitman episodic game. It's badass, and it's by far the best Hitman since the original game. So how important is the length of a single player game? This is one of those questions that doesn't have an answer that fits everyone. I would say it's pretty important, except for everybody needs something different to consider a game good. So let me break that down really quick, and I think we'll have a satisfactory conclusion. So depending on who you are and where you're from, a game might be better if it's short or if it's long. If you're an adult that has lots of responsibilities like a job, children, etc., a short game or an episodic game that you essentially pay $5, $10 a piece for each one of the chapters to might be a little bit more appealing. Whereas if you're younger and don't have a whole lot you have to do with your time, where your choices are more actually choices, when somebody asks what you want to do, it doesn't mean procrastinate or get your work done. It might be better to have a longer game because you can spend longer time sitting down, playing the game, enjoying the game, learning about the game, absorbing the lore and the narrative, all of the interesting stuff that I think we all want to do, but aren't all in situations that are conducive to spending the kind of time on a game that some others are in. I mean, to be entirely frank, sometimes I need a game to stop. I need it to have a satisfying ending just because I don't have time to keep going, and it feels really not great to just stop. I love game narratives. I love narrative gaming. And the thing that sucks so much for me is when I can't finish one. So depending on your actual situation, really any game length can be a good game length. It really depends on your expectations, as well as your situation. Obviously, a long game doesn't mean a good game, and a short game doesn't mean a bad game, and vice versa. But when your taste doesn't match up with the length of the game, when, say, maybe you want a 40-hour game and you play Uncharted 4 and you're like, well, couldn't this keep going? Not that Uncharted 4 doesn't have a great ending. I think it's an appropriate length personally, but is it Chrono Trigger? Did it give me the amount of enjoyment that Chrono Trigger gave me? Maybe not. And that doesn't change the fact that Uncharted 4 is a fantastic fucking game, possibly one of the most so out there right now. But this is one of those things where gamers have to sit down and say, what is my taste? There's an ancient Greek saying that I don't know how to pronounce, however, has been translated into English. And we say it as, know thyself. You know what you want out of a game, which is going to be different from what I want from a game, or what your friend wants, or what your cousin wants, or even you yesterday or tomorrow. The amount of time a game takes really does matter. The length of a single player game, just from an artistic perspective, knowing how long somebody will actually enjoy something is a massive conundrum to solve. And then knowing that everyone's taste is different, gotta sympathize with game developers just a little bit on this one. Publishers maybe not so much, but game developers. What do you prefer, a long game or a short game? And also, when you answer that question in the comments, I'd really be interested in how old you are, if you have a lot of responsibilities, just basic life situation stuff. And I have a feeling when we compare everybody's responses, we might come up with something that makes us understand each other a little bit more. And as you might know, that's kind of like the thing that I like to do. It's fun, understanding each other more. Anyway, if you like that and this video as well, please click the like button. And if you're not subscribed, now is a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every single day of the week. The best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription. As always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I am Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at FalconTheHero, and we'll see you next time right here on gameranx.